Well, let's get started. Let me welcome you to our annual Spring Landscaping Workshop. My name is Jim Vaughan. I am the Environmental Coordinator with the City of St. Louis Park. I've been doing this job for, in its capacity for about last 13 years. I've been with the city for 27 years in different roles, from forester to park maintenance supervisor to environmental coordinator, who manages our natural resource division or environmental division. I'm a St. Louis Park graduate, so I didn't fall too far from the tree, and it's a pleasure to work for all of you and for the City of St. Louis Park. And I'm going to talk a lot about different things with kind of an organic bent to it. And if you have any questions, by all means, raise your hand or just blurt out something. If you have a long scenario, for example, for the TV, we'd like you to step up to the podium if you remember to do that, if you want to say something as well. Otherwise, I'll try to repeat your question as much as I can for the viewing audience. You can watch it on ParkTV on stream this if you missed something, or on channel 17 if you have cable. Also, I'm happy to share the PowerPoint slides. I can't send you the whole PowerPoint presentation because it's far too large, but so hopefully I won't go too fast for you. And if, again, my card's in the back, and help yourself to any of the materials in the back, and I'd be happy to send some of those to you as well. So with that, why don't we get started? We're going to talk about a bunch of different things, from lawns to gardens to trees to invasive pests and other things that hopefully will be of some interest and some help to you. I always want to talk about the benefits of plants, and there's all kinds of benefits, and they're finding out more and more and more reasons why we plant trees, why we plant native things in particular, but there's from human health to saving money to making money in terms of your property values, wildlife. There's an array of things, and that's some of the reasons why a lot of us are interested in yards and gardens and nature. Here's kind of a thing that I always like. I never treat my lawn. I haven't treated my lawn in over 25 years. And believe it or not, my neighbors on both sides treat their lawns, and they still will talk to me even when the dandelion season's in full bloom. So I like to think that there are a couple of different scenarios that you can take. You can either treat it, and you don't have to go wild treating it, or you can not treat it, and you kind of hope for the best in terms of having a green lawn if you're interested in that, but you're also contributing to a lot of the pollinators and a lot of the native insects and other things if you don't necessarily treat that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So lawns, fertilizing and treating them, they find really the best time to do that is in the fall. And if you prescribe to a chemical company where they're continually doing it month after month during the summer, the hot, dry times, it's really the wrong time to do it, and it's just running off. It's not doing any good for your lawn whatsoever. Here's something if you're considering organic control, and this corn gluten meal actually will serve as a fertilizer, and it actually will control some broadleaf weeds. It takes a couple years for dandelions to get under control with it, but they have found that it works pretty well, and you can buy it in granular form and liquid form. I believe like Home Depot or some of the hardware stores will have it. We have a few citizens that actually will take the low grow or no mow grass, and have put that in their entire lawns. It gets about 6 or 8 inches, and it will flop over. It's not meant for high wear areas, so if you have young kids, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you have kind of a partial shade yard, it works great. You don't have to really mow your yard too much. And it fits perfectly with our weed ordinance. We have an 8-inch weed ordinance, so if grass grows over that, I'm the bad guy that sends you the weed notice to tell you to cut it. So, but we do have a native vegetation ordinance that's outside of the weed ordinance, and that will entail you to enable you to grow native grasses and forbs in your yard if you like to, and that only will kick in if you have over 25% of your yard in native grasses or native forbs. So the reason for that is we've had a number of people that have made their whole yard grasses, and the neighbor would call next door because they didn't like it, and according to our ordinance, we had to make them cut it when it was over 8 inches. So we got outside of that because we wanted to start promoting more native grasses. We changed the ordinance about 10 years ago to reflect the native aspect. So if you're interested in that, we just ask you to fill out a little permit. There's no cost. We just want to keep track of the houses that have it, so we don't send you that weed ordinance by mistake. And so we know that you're actually trying to do a native vegetation yard. You just can't let your grass grow. We have had people do that, just let it grow to seed. Turf grass, that doesn't count. You have to fill out a little maintenance plan to let us know how you're going to maintain it. You just can't let it grow and say it's a native yard. So There are some things that you can and can't do, unfortunately, for the good of the cause. Spot spraying is another thing, and that's called what we call integrated pest management. If you ever heard of that, that's where you're not doing a broadcast, you're just considering some of the elements that you have and spraying some of those things, perhaps a few dandelions, things like that. So that's what we refer to when we refer to more for integrated pest management. Aeration is another tool that you can use if you want to keep your turf more on the organic side and less chemicals. You can rent these machines, or you can hire somebody to come and do it. Again, the fall is probably the best time to do it. You can also seed right into that after that. A lot of times they'll pull soil plugs out and you can leave them or rake them into your turf, and you seed right into those soil plugs, and it really will make your grass thicker and healthier. Compost is another thing. We offer compost at our site, and I'll show the map in a little bit, on Cedar Lake Road if you're familiar with it, at Colorado, just west of Home Depot. We offer a large pile of compost for the taking and also wood mulch for the taking, free of charge, and it's open where we have it stored. You can get it anytime, 24/7. And we'll replenish the stock continually, so we keep those nice and full. Seeding is a good thing I like to have people do versus sod. Seeding, you're more invested in it. You start it from nothing and you get to watch it grow, and you will actually help support it and supplement it by watering and kind of monitoring it and maybe whistling or singing to it as well if you're interested. But this is the best thing. We do that a lot with our seeds. If you do sod, it's only going to look the best when you get it from the nursery or the store, wherever you buy it from. It's never going to look as good as that because they really juice it up with chemicals, ideal growing conditions, perfect watering, and then you get it to your place. It's never going to look that good. So keep that in mind, where seed will be the opposite. It doesn't look good at the start, but it looks great at the end, and you're a little bit more invested. If you do have to do this, for a graduation or a little spot area, recommend buying the starter fertilizer. It's like the 10-10-10 variety of fertilizer. Put a little down below on the soil that you scarify or you have open. Put a little of the fertilizer down, then put the grass on top of it, and you'll have knitting within about a week. You'll have roots that are growing into the ground. So that really does help. I alluded to this a little bit. Here's the high maintenance and the low maintenance. Again, the fall time is best to do the fertilizing and the pesticide control, and really you only need to do it once a year for both of those things. More than that, you have a lot of it running off into our ponds, which again are already polluted enough, and they are greening up earlier and earlier every year because of the phosphorus and nitrogen that's running off primarily from lawns. And if you do, and when you do fertilize, be sure you go in at least two directions, so we don't have that zebra type lawn where you have the dark strip and then the light strip and the dark green. So that'll prevent that if you continue, at least do it at a couple different angles. And you can get your soil tested if you're interested. We certainly have a lot of phosphorus in our soils here. You probably don't have to worry about that, but if you think you have some deficiency in something else, a mineral deficiency, you can go to the U. They will not test for heavy metals at the U. They'll send you somewhere else, and it's a lot more expensive. I think this is around $15 or $20 for a soil test at the U. So environmentally friendly landscaping, we try to do that in the city. We're doing all kinds of native landscapes around water bodies, some ponds, lakes. We're working with the Watershed District to enhance Minnehaha Creek. We've created a lot of rain gardens. We're doing a lot of this already. And the idea is to have minimal inputs of fertilizer, water, and pesticides. That's the bulk of it, trying to plant the right plant in the right space if possible. I get a question a lot about native versus non-native, and really when they did the land survey in 1850, anything after that that's brought in here is considered non-native. I mean, that's a long time ago. Plus, we don't have native soils really here. I mean, most of the St. Louis Park has been filled in some manner. So to be a purist is one thing, but and it's not going to get you too far. I would suggest a combination of what are the perceived native and the non-native, which we have plenty of both, and a lot of them do very, very well in specific situations. Here's again another reason to plant more natives. They support our wildlife. An example is a oak tree will support 532 moths or butterflies and all the other ensuing insects and microorganisms and animals up and down the food chain. They'll support even more of those when you start multiplying that versus a Weigelia that you can plant here, and we see them a lot, but they'll support two of the same type of thing. So think about that when you're planting certain plant materials, if you want to contribute to wildlife, you got to think that out a little bit. And you can certainly find these things. I'll have a couple of references later in the presentation about where you can look to see if they are actually native and if they would be conducive for enhancing your native habitat. And again, native plants, we do that, I said, around a lot of water bodies. And the reason for that is that they are really drought tolerant. They survive a lot of dry areas because they have such deep roots. Some of them go down to 14 feet, where turf grass maybe goes down 4 inches with their roots. So they can withstand a lot of dry periods because their roots reach down. They can reach that water. Plus, they're great for having the water. When it flows, water will follow the roots a lot where they are opened at the soil. So they can go down and the water will infiltrate much further down and will again replenish our aquifers and other things like that. These guys are great, and they're a great reference, bluethumb.org, if you're interested in rain gardens or perennial gardens for that matter, native gardens. This is a really good source. We do plant rain gardens. We haven't planted them in the streets like some cities. In Burnsville, for example, Maplewood, they have had curb cuts and put into their streets and have had some rain gardens put in along their boulevards. We are looking at that in terms of our engineering department, but we haven't quite got to that point yet. We're still a little uncertain if somebody moves, if they're willing to maintain it for us, and a few things like that. So rain gardens are basically a garden that's oftentimes put in a low spot where water gathers, and you can either just plant right into that low spot, or you can amend it with perhaps some type of a grass, or a grass of sand that's right in here, so it will drain down and the water will infiltrate so it doesn't pond. Or you can try some other amendments as well. And then it's designed to have the wet plants that are in the base of the basin of the garden, and then the drier plants successively planted up. So wet down here and then a little drier. And plants really absorb a lot of water. For example, a mature cottonwood will transpire about 150 gallons on a hot, windy day. So that's how much water is going out of the leaves of just one tree on one hot, dry summer day. So they really absorb a lot of water, and they're really great for stormwater management, and we're trying to plant a lot more of those at this point. Rain gardens, again, the perennial plants are the key, and there's all kinds of references. I didn't really put a lot of plants down here. But again, we recommend a variety of things, including trees in your gardens if you can help it, or at least around the perimeter, if not in the middle of it. You do not, unless it's if it's over perhaps like 25% of your whole grass, your whole yard. Minnehaha Creek Watershed District has grants that they offer too. They'll pay up to a certain amount of for your plant material if you're interested in a rain garden. We do have a rain garden workshop that the city sponsors with the Watershed District that's put on by Blue Thumb and Blooms, Metro Blooms. And that's on May 28th, and I'll have that again at the end of the presentation. That's at our rec center on, I think it's 6:30 or 6 o'clock. So they charge, I think, $15, and they go through about a 3-hour program. It's really quite nice. So you can zero down on your yard and actually design one for your yard if you're interested in that. So for butterfly and bee gardens and St. Louis Park on this past Monday, is officially a bee-friendly city, which means that we have dedicated a number of our parks to not spraying at all, and we're trying to promote pollinators and bees, and so we are really minimizing the amount of pesticides and insecticides that we're using in the city, and we're hoping that people will kind of follow our lead as well. You'll see signs out at some of the parks. We have 8 parks that are dedicated right now to being bee-friendly. Again, having no spraying. We'll probably add to that, and we're going to increase education about bees and pollinators as well. So just wanted to throw that in there. But you need 2 types of plants if you want to have a pollinator or a butterfly garden. So keep that in mind. Some for the caterpillars and some for the adults. If you're thinking about monarchs, they like the common milkweed. That's the plant for them if you're interested in providing a habitat for monarchs, which of course we are. We all used to, and common milkweed used to be a noxious weed not that long ago in Minnesota, and they realized that the pollinators were dying off because of the pesticides. And primarily it was a noxious weed in agricultural areas, so they would get into the agricultural fields, into the crops, and so they were considered that because of that. And so we had to abide by the state laws in terms of enforcing noxious weed laws. So we were unfortunately taking it out until about 5 or 8 years ago only. So encourage you to plant that. Here's some trees that are good for butterfly and bee gardens. Most trees are wind pollinated, so they don't have a lot of pollinators come to them. So I've had a lot of questions about chemical inducements to insects and pollinators. And the linden or the basswood is probably the primary pollinating tree that we have around here. So keep that in mind. If you really want to draw pollinators, particularly bees, that would be the tree to plant. We do plant that as well on the boulevard. And I'll get into some of our planting in a little bit. Here's again some perennials that really do well for butterflies and bees. And if you plant a lot of the red ones too, I've had hummingbirds that'll just come. And I don't have a hummingbird feeder, but they will be attracted to that if you have the right combination of plants. So organic and gardens are really easy to start. I've done a lot of them. I'm not a turf guy, so I like to minimize the amount of turf I have on my yard. And so I always pick a spot every year to expand or make a garden. And how I do it is very simple. I leave the turf there. I just gather newspaper, put 7 or 10 layers of newspaper in the area. First, I'll figure out what kind of design I want, maybe spray paint it with some white paint. And then I'll put the newspaper down on that. And this is after I've done research in terms of how the yard looks with sun, shade, different times of the day to kind of get the feel if it's going to be shade-tolerant plants or sunny plants or combination thereof. And then I'll do that, figure out what kind of plants will work there, and then start putting the layers down, get the wood chips from our free site over there, get it about 6 or 8 inches deep, nice and deep. I like it deep. And then I'll just put the pots out there after I purchase the plants, see if it works for me, and then I'll just dig the little hole and have a pot on the side to put the dirt in and plant those. And I have really good success that way. And you get nice contours. You don't have just the flat lawn either that way. And you don't have to dig up. It's a lot of work to dig up turf. So I'm kind of a lazy gardener in that regard. I like to just put that down and have at it from there. And there's a site, Plant Selector, MnDOT, the Minnesota Department of Transportation, Plant Selector. If you Google that, that'll come up. And they have all the different types of species that'll grow in Minnesota, from trees to shrubs to forbs. And it's a really nice reference website. So I just kind of went through that and explained that, and it's again, it's an easy way to do it, and I've had really great success. The thing that I found when I've made house calls, and we do make house calls at no cost. I have an assistant that comes on in about a month, and between him and I, we'll make free house calls. If you're interested in anything that's green and growing besides trees, we'll make some objective opinions and recommendations and prescriptions for you on that. My card is in the back if you're interested. You can also find me online, email me or call me, and we'd be happy to come out and give you that objective opinion, hopefully. But find out where your stakes are. We go out to more homes than not, and people don't have a clue where their property line ends, and they end up putting their irrigation line on the neighbor's property, or they plant a tree on the 2 properties, and that gets to a big size and becomes an issue. So think about where you're, and if you don't know, you can come to our inspections department downstairs 1 floor, and you can probably get, I think it's either nominal or free, the survey plat or a copy of it. They'll have that for you. And keep it simple and plant odd numbers. I'm not a landscape designer, but I've been in the business long enough to know a few little tricks, and supposedly the odd numbers work better. And don't get too complex. If you're going to do the garden like I described with the newspapers, just don't take on your whole backyard. Take on a small area. See how that works for you. If you take on too much, you're never going to succeed. It's going to be too much work, and you'll have a negative experience, and you won't want to come back and do it again. So do it in pieces. You'll be much better off, and keep it simple. Here are some great nurseries that we use for a lot of our native plants. And again, none of these are treating their plants with neonicotinoids, so you can be assured of that. But we have a number of these that will work for us as well that manage some of our prairie areas. We have so many native areas, and we have a huge prairie up at our nature center, if you're familiar with that, in the entrance. My people, and I don't have time to do it, and frankly, a lot of my guys that work for me and us, they don't know the difference between a weed and a forb, so we hire the pros to do it. And so they'll come in and do a good job. If you're interested, they do residential designs and will help you. A lot of them have seed mixes just designed for residential sites or small square footage areas. Invasive species is a big thing, and it's only going to get bigger, unfortunately. So I want to touch on a few things. And you can see where they're displacing a lot of our natives with invasives now, unfortunately. Here's a big thing you're going to see this year. This is the DNR's campaign to think about invasives and what you can do to prevent them, or at least prevent the spread of them from the aquatics to the terrestrial, which is on the land, to the airborne insects. They have quite a program. Dandelions are an invasive species. They've been around for a long time. We've adapted to them for the most part, and again, some of our pollinators have even used them. They're one of the first to spring out in the growing season, so they're great for the early nectar gathering for the pollinators. Here are some that we certainly have and are getting bigger. The bighead carp are coming in the Mississippi, unfortunately. The sea lamprey have been controlled. They were a big problem in the 70s, I think, in Lake Superior. They did find biological control for that, so they have it under control. It's still in Lake Superior, but the numbers are way down. Biological control is finding a mechanism or a critter that breaks up the biology of it. So for that one, I think they found where it spawned up into freshwater ponds where it was going to lay eggs, and they disrupted it somehow. They were able to treat it or catch them before they were able to do that. So that's how they were able to control that. We always are looking for biological controls in some of these, and we've had some success and some not with some of our invasive species. Here's something that we could be thankful we don't live in Florida for. The Burmese pythons escaped with some of the hurricanes they've had there, and a lot of people had them for pets or in pet stores. Perfect habitat where the alligators are, so they compete for the habitat. I've been reading they can move, they're thinking they might move up to perhaps North Carolina in the future, but I think it's a little too cold up here for them. So. Here are a few that we do have. I'm going to touch on some of them here. Emerald ash borer is not in St. Louis Park yet, and it gets its name because of its emerald green luster or wings that it has. It's really detrimental to ash. And I get a lot of calls about this. These are all native insects, and here's the emerald ash borer. So it's not very big. The cicadas are those buzzers that you hear in October, late fall, or late summer, early fall, and everything in between. We have a lot of native ash. So Minnesota is really concerned about emerald ash borer. In fact, we have the largest population of native ash in the lower 48. So a huge industry in northern Minnesota, primarily black ash. It likes the boggy, swampy areas. That's where we get most of our ash from. Here's the different ash that we have in St. Louis Park. So if you don't know if you have an ash, I'd be again happy to come out and identify that tree or all your trees for you, just to let you know what you have, so you know what you're going to be dealing with in case this particular thing comes through. The red dots are all the places that this has been found already. It started in Detroit in about, I think, 1999. They figured it came in. They didn't see it till 2001. By that time, it had spread all over the Detroit proper area, and then soon after went to the suburbs. How it got in, they think it came in the port on some wood crates. Most of the crates, or all the crates that come in from internationally, are supposed to be treated with pesticides. Well, they took the product out, set the crate aside, and obviously was not treated with pesticides. These things escaped and started infecting the local ash trees. And unfortunately, a lot of foresters replaced the elms that we lost to Dutch elm disease with ash the last 30 years ago. So they have high populations of ash. In St. Louis Park, since I've started, we have not overplanted ash, and we diversify among our boulevards or our blocks. We have about 18% of our population ash. We have about 2,800 ash on our boulevards as we speak. And if you, just as a side note, if you were to go to Minneapolis, for example, you'll see that they plant the same species every block. Well, they have started to realize that that's not a good thing either with emerald ash borer coming, so they started to diversify among the blocks as well. But we've been doing that for a long time, and I think our losses will not be as great, and we won't feel the impacts as much as some of those other cities where they planted the same species block after block, or high percentage of them. This is in the metro area where emerald ash borer is found. So it's in the metro. The latest find is right here in Egan. It's in a Dakota County park. And we're our own worst enemies when it comes to a lot of these invasives. They figured the wood, it was right at a campsite in Dakota County Park. They figured the wood was brought in from somewhere from the east, perhaps the Michigan area. And they set it right there. They're using it for firewood, and it affected nearby ash trees. And so there's a pocket there. A lot of the other ones are related to kind of the same idea. The closest infestations we've had is at Lakewood Cemetery 2 years ago. which is just on the east side of Lake Calhoun. And there are some in the river bottoms over off of Prospect Park in Minneapolis. Those are probably the closest to St. Louis Park. Again, it's really a hard thing to predict where it's going to come and when it's going to come again. But the Minnesota Department of Agriculture is the agency that will deal with invasives until the invasives are too far gone. Then they hand that project over to the DNR to manage. So they work together in partnership, but the MDA takes the lead role. So they will put out these traps, and they're called pheromone traps, where they actually have a chemical inside, and there's a sticky substance inside. So the chemical will attract the male emerald ash borer, thinking it's a female, and it flies in there and it gets stuck to the side. And so that's how they will able to determine if we have infestations, or they'll see them on the trees themselves. But they put all those little dots, or all the sampling around all the different the kits that they have right now, the tests that are out there. So emerald ash borer is most damaging in the larva stage. The insect will fly to an ash, and it will lay the eggs just underneath the bark. The eggs will hatch into the larva, and the larvae eat the wood just underneath the bark, and that's where the transmission is of the tree, basically, the xylem and phloem, where the water and nutrients go. So it cuts off the circulation of the tree. And there'll be thousands, if not perhaps hundreds of thousands in one tree, and ends up just annihilating the tree in terms of all the wood underneath it. Just like this. This is what happens. They have a serpentine vertical movement as they're eating the bark, and as they eat, this gets bigger and bigger, and then it will actually metamorphosize, and then it comes out typically around May, depending on the spring we have, but typically around here from May to roughly October 1st is when it's in that beetle stage, that emerald stage. So what we look for are woodpeckers. Woodpeckers are really good. Somehow they know when it's nice and big and juicy and ready to eat, they'll come in and tap it. Unfortunately, we don't have enough woodpeckers to keep up with emerald ash borers. So what we do is we'll look for this. If you have an ash tree, by all means, give us a call. Typically, they'll start on the south side of trees because that's the sunny, warm side. So they'll lay their eggs on the south side. So that's where we typically see a lot of the woodpecker damage. You can inject your trees. There's a insecticide that will not affect pollinators. There's several of them out there as well. They last about 2 years. Typically, they run about $100 for an average tree, which we have about 15 inches diameter average in St. Louis Park. So if you have a tree about that size, it might run you about $100 for a 2-year protection. Then you could renew it. They're really good. I'm not recommending proactively treating your trees quite yet. I'm waiting for emerald ash borer to be found in St. Louis Park, or to be knocking at our door a little bit closer to our border. And then you can always treat these trees. It's an insecticide, so even if they were found to have a few emerald ash borer in it, even the canopy was 40% gone, you could still treat it with the insecticide, and it will kill all the insects in your tree. Should recover after that. There's a basal drench, they call it, as well as soil drench. I don't really recommend that because it's a lot of times it's misapplied. You can buy it at a hardware store, but frankly, a lot of people misapply it and probably put too much on, and it doesn't really do much good for the tree or perhaps your neighbors if they're close by. So we plant a bunch of trees in St. Louis Park, and I'm going to get into that a little bit. We're trying to diversify, like I alluded to earlier, because of insects like emerald ash borer and a few other things. Here are some of the trees that we plant. And again, we're happy to plant a tree at no cost for you on your boulevard. We would just require about a 20 to 30 foot spacing between any existing tree. So if you're interested in that, again, give me a call. We're getting on the tail end for spring. We typically plant the month of May, and I hire contractors to do it that are local. So the provenance, the birthplace of the trees and the seed are local, so they're within about 150 to 200 miles of the Twin Cities. Most of them are just on the outside of the metro area. And they will come in and they plant the trees for us. So again, we're trying to diversify with all these. We're limited a little bit by the salt tolerance of the trees because where they're located, the heat tolerance and the drought tolerance. So there's a limited palette, but we're making the most of it. Gypsy moth is another one that's an invasive species, and it will basically eat anything green and growing. It prefers like maples and oaks, but it's non-discriminatory. If it's in dire straits and hungry, it'll eat anything, and it will decimate forests and cities. And if you've been up in northern Minnesota, when the army worm that's very similar to this, looks like this, has been peaking, and they do about every 7 to 10 years, they will lay, they have cocoons everywhere, lay their eggs everywhere, and it becomes quite a mess. These things are like this too, and if you defoliate a tree, even a big mature tree, 2 or 3 years in a row, it'll end up killing it. So it's a concern, and it has moved from the East Coast right up to the border of Minnesota. Here's where the saturation point is right now in Wisconsin, so every year these folks get to deal with a heavy infestation of the gypsy moth. And we are monitoring it, and basically it's found up in the red is the high density areas. So if you look here, these tend to be our kind of our tourist spots. So people, it got its name because it lays its eggs on like wheel wells of RVs or trailers or cars that aren't moved for a while. And then people drive them, and it's a gypsy. They drive somewhere else, and somehow it'll hatch, and then it will infest other trees. So it moves by, again, by us, basically. So the North Shore is the primary thing. Last winter, not this past one, but 2014-13 winter, when it got really cold, it decimated. There were over 70,000 that they captured in those traps, like the trap up there in the North Shore area. And then this past year, they did a trap again. They only had like 500 total. So winters and coldness will kill some of these things. They're looking at that for emerald ash borer too. There's studies at the U seeing just how cold it needs to be to kill most of the population of emerald ash borer. Japanese beetle were really big a couple years ago. They weren't too bad last year. I'm thinking they probably won't be too bad this year either. But they do more damage to turf grass than to trees. When the trees get the damage, they're kind of on that steady hold. Trees will grow. The spring is the critical time for trees to get the water to them, to make sure they got the sun. And then they level off come July or August. They're kind of on cruise control. And so if you start messing with their leaves, they're not getting that much chlorophyll back into themselves at that point, so it really doesn't do much harm to them. But the grubs will eat the roots of turf grass, and that's where we see a lot of spots where typically in early spring, right before they hatch in mid-July, you'll see a lot of the damage. So they like the juicy, well-nourished lawns that are well-fertilized. It's easier for the adults to lay the eggs versus a hard, compacted soil. So they prefer golf courses or people that have irrigation. Dutch elm disease is still a problem. That's another invasive insect that we're dealing with. We still have several thousand elms in St. Louis Park, and they're nice, mature trees, average about 30 inches. So the elms are twice the size of the ash, just to think about that. And these are, the Dutch elm disease is transmitted by these two insects. One's a native and one's a non-native. And what happens is that they will feed, they'll fly to a healthy elm and feed on the new growth of the elm that's typically at the edges of either way up at the crown or on the edges of the crown. Before it hardens off into wood, they'll eat into the crotch and create a little wound, and they typically will have the spore of Dutch elm disease fungus on their bodies, and it'll go into that little hole, and then it will go into the vessels of the tree, and it basically, the tree tries to react and ends up cutting off its own circulation, ends up dying or drying out. So we have to try to remove these as fast as we can to try to disrupt the cycle, otherwise the beetles will keep reproducing every summer. Again, could do multiple life cycles. So the beetle will lay its eggs like the emerald ash borer just under the bark right here. The eggs hatch, and again, as the larva or the worm gets bigger and eats the layer just underneath the bark, gets to a certain size, and it will eat itself out and fly to a nearby elm tree for nourishment. Here are the numbers that we've done over the last, quite a while of trees that we removed. And again, average size of these is 22 inches, so we're losing big trees, again, that have all those great benefits for us, from health to stormwater to all kinds of things. So we're trying to protect them. We do offer a program. If you want to inject your elm trees, we'll pay 15% of the cost to protect it against Dutch elm disease. We're looking at the emerald ash borer, similar to the injection. Once we get it here, it gets close to it, I'm going to promote people to start injecting. We're thinking of helping people with those injection costs too, probably 15%. Buckthorn is a big problem, and it's here to stay. The university has tried to do studies, and they thought they had a biological control, but they have not found anything. They found it in Europe, but they found about 4 different insects that'll feed on it and control it. And what they can't do is bring 4 different insects over here and let them go wild, because those things would probably become invasive insects as well. So what they realize is that it's here to stay and we're going to have to deal with it. And unfortunately, there's no laws, there's no noxious weed ordinance against it. It appears on the Minnesota Department of Agriculture noxious weed list, but it's not something that has to be regulated or controlled because it's just out of hand. I mean, we have it everywhere. Unfortunately, it's getting further and further in the state. All these little dots and triangles are identified buckthorn. So Boundary Waters is probably one of the only areas that we don't have it yet. And these aren't complete infestations, but they have found it in these spots. So it's unfortunate. It's really labor intensive to deal with it. We do have 2 weed wrenches, they're called. These things right here. And we offer them free of charge to people. If you have a small little pocket of buckthorn, we're happy to loan these out for you for a couple weeks. We offer them at a time. And they take up to about 1-inch diameter of buckthorn. So it saves on your back. They're kind of heavy, but there's a little claw down here that you get next to the buckthorn. You squeeze it. As you pull it, it'll squeeze it. And so you can just pull it out, roots and all. If you leave the roots in there, you're going to have to treat them with some kind of a chemical such as Roundup. And for the larger stuff, that's about all you can do. Typically, when we do it, if it's in the fall, it tends to be the best time because a lot of the sap is going back into the roots, so it really sucks up the glyphosate, for example, the Roundup, and then we will put food coloring in there just to make sure that we've...
When is the best time?
In the fall. Yeah, and this stuff, if you've ever been in the woods or if you have it in your house, this is the only stuff still has green leaves, like mid-November, so it's pretty easy to spot, or it has those big black berries as well. It really produces a lot of those. There's a male and female, so if you're going to start it, I would start with the female plants first, the ones that produce the berries. Get rid of those because those are the ones that are going to keep reproducing more and more. And then you can either deal with the males or not. You'll know if they're male or female because they will or will not produce those berries. So take it on, again, do it in stages because it's a lot of work and it's very hard to do. And then replant with some of the native shrubs that are available or trees. Earthworms are non-native to Minnesota. There's only, I think, 1 earthworm that's native in the lower 48 states. It's tend to found in the southeastern part of the United States. And these have been always thought to be really good for your turf, that they aerate the turf and create pockets for the roots of the turf to grow. Well, they may indeed do that, but the research at the U has found that they are decimating our native forests and woodlands, because what they do is they eat the duff layer, that layer where all the leaves or the needles fall down. It gets nice and thick, that organic mass that kind of decomposes at will. And we need it for our native trees like the oaks and maples. They need that duff layer to germinate their seeds. And if they don't have the duff layer, they can't germinate their seeds. And so what happens is that these things are eating it, and there's no regeneration into the forest. It's like sanitized, so it's a sterile environment. And the irony is that buckthorn likes an area where it's not a thick duff layer as well. So that comes in. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch. It's really unfortunate. So if you do fish, keep your worms to yourself and put them in the garbage. We all really appreciate that. They are, again, spreading quite fast and all over the state. So plant selection is important. You know, keep in mind when you if you do hire landscapers or landscape architect, I love them, but they tend to plant things a little close together for that instant look, and things will get bigger and they will grow. So keep in mind the shape that you want and the size of that. Again, go to that Minnesota Plant Selector. They will tell you some of those things. We're in Zone 4. The smaller the number, the colder the winter. So Zone 3 is northern Minnesota. Zone 2 is up in Canada. With global climate change, the zone is a 5 in the lower metro, and even in the metro area, in our area, if you have a protected south area, you could probably get away planting magnolias. If you see those early flowering, multi-stemmed, nicely pretty, a lot of pink flowers. They tend to be shrubs about 10 to 15 feet tall. Those are magnolias. Those do fairly well if they're, again, in a protected site. So you can play around with a little of the planting zones, but look for that Zone 4 to ensure, or even 3, to ensure that you're going to have hardy plants when you buy them at the nursery. And if you do buy plants, again, try to go to local nurseries or find out where the seed source is from. I know Menards and Home Depot and Costco even sell plants, but a lot of times those plants are from Oklahoma or some growing area. Their seed source is somewhere south where they will not tolerate winters very well. A lot of times you can see some of the plants that were planted years ago. Norway maples, there's one here, for example. They are the last to lose their leaves in the fall, and they're the earliest to have their leaves come on because they like a longer growing season. They're from an area in the northeast of the United States where this growing season is a little longer. So you can notice that on some of the trees that are even growing in now that we have. But keep that in mind. Most of them don't do well because of the cold hardiness aspect of Minnesota winters. If you're planting, and here is something that we recommend if you're buying the container trees, and we have a tree sale going on right now, by the way, and I had some information back there, a brochure about them, and it's available online. It's through treetrust.org. If you're interested, you order it online. $35. The city will actually supplements the cost. Typically, it costs about $100 to $125 for one of these trees. They're about an inch in diameter, 10-gallon pots. And there were 350 trees left. I think we're down to about 50 trees left. We had 7 different varieties, but we're trying to encourage people to plant trees on their yards just as a preventative for invasives coming in, for other things that are happening to a lot of trees on lawns. So we have our canopy, but that's something to consider. And if you do buy those trees, make sure you take off. Obviously, you're going to take off the plastic pot, but when you do, dig down here as well, because a lot of times there's a lot of extra soil that's put on there. Trees are grown like crops, and they'll come through with machinery to keep the weeds clear between the rows of the crops. And as they keep the weeds cleared, oftentimes they'll push dirt on top of the stem of the tree, and before you know it, after a few years in the nursery, you can get 6 or 8 inches of extra dirt. And what they have found is that the roots will actually, if you plant it at the depth that's in the pot, if you plant this here, at the soil here, it actually will create the roots to go in a circle and will actually constrict itself and ends up killing it. They call it stem girdling root. So in order to avoid that, dig down till you find what we call the trunk flare. These are first order roots. Till you find those, that's the depth that you want to plant at. So again, don't be afraid if you keep going and you keep going 5, 6 inches down, you don't find those. You will eventually find them. And then you can see here there's concentric roots that are growing in a circle. To get rid of those, the university recommends cutting off an inch and make it a square. Instead of a circle, cut off an inch all the way around, and that'll promote root growth, and you'll have much better success. So it seems like you're really butchering the tree, but that is the way to do it. Yes?
What about if you have an underground sprinkler system?
Nope. If you have an underground sprinkler system, just obviously make sure you know where your lines run and your heads. They would typically be in a line together. But no, there's nothing more than that. We recommend that they come with a bag of mulch too, so be sure you mulch it after you plant it. But no, there's that. And again, irrigation's good, but these new trees actually require more water than that. Irrigation is basically for the turf. So your turf is nourished with the irrigation, but your trees will actually need a little extra TLC. We do sell the gator bags, we call them, those green bags you've seen we've planted on or put on a number of our trees that we put on the boulevards in our parks. Those we recommend, if you want to buy those, filling those up twice a week during the whole springtime and throughout the summer. The first 2 years are the most critical for trees in terms of establishment. So again, those green bags are available via the Tree Trust site as well. If you just want to buy those, you could do that there as well. Here's what I was talking about with the roots. And the roots, here's where the plants, all the soil was in the pot, and you have to dig it down quite a ways before you get to them. And this is what they end up doing. They'll encircle itself, and it ends up cutting it off. A lot of times in strong winds, this is where the tree will break right off. So otherwise, you'll see it die slowly at the top. You'll see it really get really thinner and thinner of leaves, and after a few years, it ends up just dying. Maples are notorious for having this happen to them, as well as basswoods. Unfortunately, we've had to remove a lot of trees. This research came out maybe 10 or 15 years ago at the latest, and before that, no one in the industry really knew the proper way to do it. So we have had to remove a number of trees that have had this symptom for planting too deep. And if you do get a tree, please leave these on. A lot of people take them off, but they're on there for a reason. They don't look the greatest, but they help protect. We have a relatively large deer population in St. Louis Park, and so they like to rub, the bucks like to rub their antlers, get the fur off the antlers in the fall. And that's one reason why we leave them on, to protect the bark, as well as mice will eat around them, and squirrels, if they're desperate, will eat them in the winter time as well, eat the bark off, and it will also help promote the tree growth a little bit. So keep that in mind. I mentioned the gator bags. If you are mulching, don't do this. This is Home Depot, and you're probably driven by, you thought, oh, looks nice, but it's the wrong thing to do. They're trying to sell mulch, and you can make a lot of sales that way, but dig it out here because this creates an area for insects and fungus to live. It's a nice moist area, and that'll lead to some root rot or decomposition of the trunk and end up weakening the tree. So keep your mulch outside what's called the drip line. This is the drip line right here. This is where the critical water absorption roots are for the tree. So if you can get it thicker out here to protect those, thinner along here, you're going to have much greater success. Here's our site, aerial photo of the site where you can get the wood mulch and the compost. You have to load yourself, unfortunately. This is also the same place where the brush disposal site is. We offer a free service to residents. You can obviously leave your woody stems with the garbage pickup. You can either bundle it or put it in a plastic container, just the odds and ends sticks up to 4 inches diameter. Our service will pick that up on your garbage day. That's starting the first week in April. If it's over 4 inches in diameter, you can bring it to our site either all day Saturday from 7 to 3, Sunday from noon to 4, or all day on Tuesday from 4 to 8, and you can drop off all that. We just require a ID to show that you're a St. Louis Park resident. Yes?
If we invest in mulch and not get the free mulch, are there specific types of mulch that are better than others?
Yeah, specific type of mulch. Yeah, you know, the cypress mulch, some people would say that there's an issue with cutting trees down just for mulch, the cypress trees, because they are not that, they're valuable and they're not that great of quantity anymore. So, you know, for ecological or moral issues, there's reasons, but otherwise, I think most of the mulch is equally as good. Best time to prune your trees, again, depending on the species, but an overall, just a general comment would be in the fall, typically when the leaves have dropped off all the way through. Right now we're ending the pruning time, so April 1 is kind of the cutoff, and again, it depends how late or early the spring is. We're having a relatively early spring, and the reason being is that once the leaves start popping out, that's the worst time to prune your tree. It really does more damage than good. And also during the growing season, where if you're making wounds on some of the trees like elms or oaks or honey locusts, a lot of the wind disseminated spores can get in from like oak wilt. Dutch elm disease is wind disseminated, as well as that beetle. And with honey locust, there's a canker that's wind disseminated. So to avoid some of those, don't prune it during the growing season. And we will prune trees. We prune all our boulevard trees, and we don't charge residents for that. It's obviously you get it through your taxes, but there's no fee directly associated with that. We do it about once every 9 years. We'll go around and prune every boulevard trees, regardless of size or species. Right now, we're currently in the Fern Hill neighborhood, right around 28th and Monterey, if you're familiar with that. We have a map. I have a map online if you're interested when your neighborhood's going to be pruned, and you can follow us along on that. We hire contractors to do that, and recommend if you're going to prune your tree, make sure you have some good reasons to do it: safety, low-hanging branches, a variety of things. We offer a list of licensed contractors too. We require them to have insurance, so if they were to get injured on your property and they didn't have insurance, they could actually go after you and your insurance to get their medical bills covered. So make sure that you go through us if you're interested in hiring a tree contractor. Again, we have those lists online. I'd be happy to mail one to you as well. Some ideas on when to prune. You know, if it's flowering early summer, you want to prune right after the flowers are done, like a basswood or crabapple, for example. If you prune later, you're going to cut off the buds for next season that'll actually produce the flowers. So you won't have flowers for a year if you don't prune right after they're done flowering. Evergreens, if you want to keep them at that short little small size, if you're thinking about shrubs, typically late June, early July, when they have that lighter green new growth, keep that pruned off and you'll keep those shrubs at the same height. And here we again promote proper pruning. You don't want to hire somebody to come and top your tree. This is really hard on a tree, and it ends up killing trees most of the time. The trees are never really too big. Again, I'm a little biased, but they're never too big for the site. There are other ways to deal with it. And again, we don't prune power lines. Excel Energy does that, so don't blame us for those hack jobs that happen, unfortunately. It's electricity versus trees, and we all want electricity. So we do not do that. I get a lot of calls about that. If you're going to prune your trees yourself, You want to do, it's called the 3-step method. So if you have a branch, you want to make an undercut here to relieve the stress on the branch. And then you cut it off here. This could be 6 or 8 inches away, depending on or 4 inches, depending on how big the branch is in diameter. And then you want to make that last cut right out here. You don't want to do a flush cut, because this will cut off what's called the branch collar. This is the cells that actually heal up the branch. So you want to have a complete donut after a year or two, and then that donut will seal up, and you won't even notice that you pruned the tree after a few years. So if you don't do those things and you end up ripping it, that's an area for infection and disease or insects to come in, and you're just going to have problems persist throughout the life of the tree. Again, I spoke of the lists of licensed contractors. Again, they should be wearing all the protective gear as well as know what they're doing. We have a higher level. We require them to have a certification of an arborist certification, showing a little higher professionalism. And most cities will not even license them, so we're pretty on those and on the companies and want to make sure we're doing the best we can for our residents. Renewal pruning, if you have hedges or the lilacs, I see a lot of overgrown lilacs get really leggy and only have green at the top. Well, you can actually cut those back, and you can cut them back at different heights. So, for example, if you wanted to create a wall of green, you could cut only a third of the big stems every year. You don't want to cut more than that, because you're going to cut off the photosynthetic aspect of the tree, or the shrub. It won't be able to produce food for itself. So cut only a third of the big stalks, but you could cut some low, you could cut some here, and wherever you cut it from, it'll start to bloom, and you could have a nice green buffer if you want to screen your neighbor, for example. And with that, that's kind of the end of what I had to say. Here's some of the events that we have going on. I mentioned the tree sale. We're having our celebration of Arbor Day. We're planting a bunch of trees with Tree Trust, who's a nonprofit in St. Louis Park. They promote environmental initiatives and employ disadvantaged youth. They're a great organization. We're planting 75 trees with them at Bass Lake. Parktacular. And our new thing is the Organic Living Workshop. That's on April 18th. We're having 6 different speakers come in and talk about kind of the things I talked about, but perhaps a little bit more in depth on native landscaping, the trees from the tree sale. Tree Trust is going to be there, pollinator. We have Heather Holm, who wrote a book about pollinators. She's going to speak. Our police are coming to talk about landscaping and crime and prevention of crime through landscaping. So we're trying to create an annual event here where we're focusing on residential properties, at least the first few years, and trying to promote a lesser imprint or a lesser ecological footprint. So with that, if there are any questions, or again, take my card if you want us to make a house call, or if you have a question you don't want to ask now, I'd be happy to talk to you on the phone or email or do a site visit. Yeah.
I wanted to create a place to park an extra vehicle alongside my driveway, but I wanted to do something that was water permeable, because the runoff is the back of my lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any recommendations on how to create?
Well, they have permeable pavers now that you could use. You know, if you want to use wood mulch, something like that as well. There are a variety of things. They even have asphalt that's permeable now that you could order and get placed in there. And it would just go over, you know, the water seeps right through and infiltrates and doesn't pond at all. So those are some.
I started looking last summer. I had a really tough time finding anything. It's not in the description.
Yeah, well, you can certainly give me a call or email me. I have some ideas and some resources that I would be happy to share with you. But there are a lot of alternatives that you could do instead of just concrete and impervious surface. We're trying to eliminate the amount of pervious. If you see when developments around here now, the rules are you have to hold the water on site for a certain amount of time for water quality, so it just doesn't rush right into the nearby pond or wetland, because it has all kinds of sediments and phosphorus and chemicals in there. So we make people hold it on site for a certain period of time, so a lot of those things will filter out, and then the water will move on. So we have silt fences that people will put up ponds on their properties. There's all kinds of or what we call best management practices for storm stuff, and impervious surfaces or pervious surfaces are a big thing that we're putting in a lot of places, and developments are doing that.
The other question I have is, it seems like I have bowls that are swirling around in my yard, and I just had new grass put in
Are they?
a year and a half ago, and I'm trying to figure out what is a good way to get rid of them.
Those are voles or moles?
No, I'm pretty sure they're bowls.
Voles with the pointed nose, the little
Yep,
black.
They're small, and they only eat vegetation.
Yeah, they tend to follow the same path. So if you put the trap at certain areas, you can try to trap them that way. They're really slow too. I've had them in my yard and I've mowed over them. Sorry, but they're not the sharpest tools in the shed. Let's leave it at that. And you know, I happened to just come upon it. It was in the turf. Keeping your grass a little bit lower again. It's going to require more inputs of water though to do that. That's another thing. But yeah, I would try just. You can follow their movement, and you'll be able to follow them. There are some traps you can get to Home Depot or hardware stores have those as well. But
Do you have to dig down in underground?
no, I think these are on surface. They don't. Yeah, I think they're just surface. They just set on the surface. Yeah, they're pretty easy to control. Yeah.
I've got a crabapple tree that's been sick for years, and I don't know when to give up and cut it down, but I would want another one right there in that spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have the root and the stem to deal with from the, I don't know when to fix.
Yeah, crab apples get a what's called apple scab every year. A lot of them. There's new varieties that are disease resistant. It's a disease that gets on the leaves as it comes out, as it's unfolding in the spring. If it's a wet, cool spring, they're more prone to get it. That's probably what happens, because then midsummer they end up dropping a lot of leaves, and then pretty soon it's a thin tree and nothing left, and year after year it becomes rather skeleton-like, and that's probably what it is. So you could plant it in the same spot, but I would, you have to dig out the roots a little bit, and even when we get a stump grinder in there to grind out, they typically only go down about 8 inches, so you still have a lot of the lateral roots if it's a bigger tree and some of the stump's still there. So it's hard to plant in the exact spot. We never recommend the exact spot unless you can pull a majority of the stump out. But if you do consider it, look at the varieties that you plant and make sure it's apple scab resistant. That's the big thing that gets a lot of our crab apples here. Anything else? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the earthworms?
Yeah, they move about 20 or 30 feet a year is how they progress. And they eat that duff layer, they eat all that down. And I think there's 8 or 10 that are found now in Minnesota. Unfortunately, the big night crawlers are obviously the worst. They eat the most and are the worst in terms of our native habitats. But they're all bad, and they all will eat it, and they all will move at different rates. But typically it's 20 to 30 feet a year. Well, those are different kind of worms. The worm composters are different worms, and they don't cause a problem like the earthworms. So those are okay. Yeah, I would throw out any worms in the garbage just to be safe. Again, we're our own worst enemy when it comes to a lot of the invasives. So if we can prevent it ourselves, I think that's a step in the right direction. But typically the composting worms are not a problem. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Steve. Good.
For aerating the soil.
Yeah, they are for your lawn, for your turf grass, but they create nice little pockets for your turf grass roots to grow into. But for not our our wildland forests or native forests in Minnesota, they eat all that duff off, and there's nothing that will germinate natively from that.
Okay, one more question too. I got a tree with some branches that the leaves don't turn. They don't in the fall. They don't turn. They just stay green. And in fact, they're still there. Just a couple branches. Does that mean the branches are dead? Do you think?
It could be. It depends on the species. You know what type of tree it is, by chance. We saw a lot of trees. Well, we saw with this past fall. It got really cold really fast in November, so we saw a lot of trees that froze. They were still going through
The leaves are
the fall leaf drop.
now, but they didn't fall off the tree.
Right, so they were still in the midst of that when we had those cold snaps, and it kind of just froze them in place. So I think they should be okay.
Don't cut it down. Don't cut those branches.
No, I wouldn't cut it. I was concerned about the hot weather coming so early here this spring, because a lot of the leaves or the flowers are coming out on silver maples, for example. We have cold weather now, and it ends up freezing them, and then that'll kill the new growth on a lot of the trees. So a lot of the silver maples and some of the others were coming out budding. You may have some tip growth and tip dieback on your trees, so be patient with that. They will come around, but it's going to take a while. So hopefully the damage isn't too bad. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the city planted some trees on the boulevard.
Yeah.
How close to the street would you plan to if there are no sidewalks?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a right-of-way along every street that's the city owns. So, and they vary, unfortunately, from street to street. So typically, I tell people from the curb back 10 feet, and it may most likely be further than that back, is considered the boulevard. So that's the city right-of-way. So can keep that in mind. And if you, yeah, you don't have to have a sidewalk for us to plant a tree on your boulevard. So we could certainly, and that's where we would plant within that 10-foot area. We try to keep it away from the curb at least 3 or 4 feet if we can, if we have the room for that, for the potential root growth.
You would plant in the city's right of way.
We would plant there, yes. Yeah, and we, you know, there are certain restrictions on corners for obstructions for view, so you can see around corners, so you can't plant, you know, we wouldn't plant an evergreen around the corner, for example, stuff like that. But yeah, we will.
Should the owner check with you if they
Yep.
wanted to plant a tree?
Yeah, if you wanted to plant one, just check with us. We just want to approve, make sure we get the right plant in the right spot. So, but we'd be again happy to plant it for you as well at no cost too. So,
Wonderful.
yeah.
If I could ask a follow-up
Mhm.
question? On the recommendations about pruning the oaks and ashes and such, and I got the notion of doing it in the fall and winter. What's our cutoff is that since we're coming up here on April?
Yeah, April, right around first week in April. I wouldn't go past that first week in April this year, just because the trees were already starting to flower and some of the buds were expanding already, and they're kind of in check now. But yeah, it's getting to that critical time. And if you're going to go out for bids, if you can wait, you know, a good time to seek bids is right at Christmas or right after Christmas or in January, because the tree companies are a lot hungrier, and then your ground's frozen. You don't have to worry about damage that may come if you have a big tree that they're going to trim. Those kinds of things. You get a better price. They're 10 or 15% less oftentimes during that time. So keep that in mind.
Thank you.
I heard that, hi Jim.
Hi.
I heard that, the Bass Lake
Preserve?
restoration, right where the Main Park at.
Right.
They're gonna be like citizen volunteers or when does that happen?
Yeah, she's alluding to a Bass Lake Preserve, which is right on Beltline Boulevard and 36th Street, just north of the rec center, if you're familiar with it. There's I think it's a $5 million project for restoring the entire woodland around it, as well as dredging out some of the cattails and making more room for stormwater management as well as recreational aspects. So we have Great River Greening, who incorporates a lot of volunteers with their planting. They're going to come in and help us, as well as Tree Trust. So we're doing the first phase. It's going to be starting probably with that kickoff of that Arbor Day celebration, and then we're going to have successive plantings and phases that'll be put in over the next couple of years. But that's a pretty exciting project. We have Great River Greening also helping us to create and implement a master plan at our nature center as well, Westwood Hills Nature Center. So.
Do you have a recommendation, one or two trees that would be like native trees with a taproot for a boulevard tree?
Yeah, the taproots are typically, like the bur oak has a taproot. We plant boulevard bur oaks. The taproots will go away. Typically, most of the trees will have them early on. Maybe the first 10, 15 years is a long time, but then the taproot ends up dying off once the tree gets established. But the bur oak is our native that's found in the prairies. It's used to, it competes with all those native plants issue with the long roots, so that's where the taproot kind of came from. But that's the best one for a taproot. It's not a fast grower, but it will be steady, you know. And we're trying to plant trees. If you want us to plant a tree, we do offer requests, but we are not planting any maples anymore. We've overplanted maples. We don't want to get in the same trouble that we did with ash or elms, so we're limiting the amount of maples and recommend that you consider something else as well. That's the #1 tree everyone requests from us because of the beautiful fall color. But there is an insect coming from the East Coast. It's called the Asian longhorn beetle that loves maples and will end up killing, and is killing maples in the Northeast as we speak. So yeah, don't ask for maple. Anything else? Well, stick around if you have some individual questions. By all means, come on up. Thanks for coming.